In the last video, we talked about the idea of a simple random sample. And in this video, we're going to be talking about three other types of sampling that are kind of based on this idea. These happen to be the stratified sample, the cluster sample, and a systematic sample. Now, I have some pictures down here that are going to help us try to visualize what these different sampling techniques look like. Just as a quick recap, remember that in a simple random sample, we first had to have all of the people in the population numbered. You can kind of see here that on the shirts of all the different individuals, there's a number. And then we use like our calculator, random number generator, to pull out a handful of individuals from that population group. When we do each of these other types of samplings, our goal is to try to maybe get some specific representation from our population to be present. Notice that if we were to only ever do simple random samples, it might possibly be the case that we only survey males from the population. And we might say, well, I want some female opinions as well. It might be the case that you only survey Republicans and you might want some Democrats. And so we come up with some other techniques to maybe try to guarantee some input from people in different categories or groups. And you'll see kind of where these categories and groups come in each of these first two definitions. So take a look here at the stratified sample. It's the one pictured over here at the top right. Again, we're still going to start with a population that is completely numbered. So we have a frame. We have everybody in the population. They're numbered off. But we imagine the population being split into groups. So like here, we have the men split apart from the women. Okay. And then what we do is we say, okay, I'm going to kind of now take a small, simple random sample, but from each of the individual groups. So I get some men and I get some women. And this is very different than just pulling 4 people, say, overall from the starting population. So this is the idea of the stratified. First, what we do is we split the population into groups, and then we do a simple random sample from each group. Now, it doesn't just have to be 2 groups. It could be 3 groups or 1,000,000 groups. Doesn't matter. I just have to split into some number of groups. Now, a cluster sample starts very much the same way. You'll see this picture down here in the bottom right. We still have our population kind of here where everybody's numbered off. But then what we do is we imagine sectioning off or creating different groups. So you can see here like I have a first group, maybe the people 1 through 4. Then I have a second group. And I can create a whole bunch of different groups of individuals, or what we call different clusters. And this technique says, instead of doing what stratified did, where we take a couple people out of each individual group, how about we instead randomly select what groups we are interested in surveying? So if I imagine that this was, say, group number 1, group number 2, group number 3, group number 4, group number 5, and group number 6, I could say, let's do a random number generator on 1 through 6, and let's pick 2 of the groups to survey. And in this case, you'll see that group 1 is being selected, and I'm going to survey everybody there. And group number 5 is being selected, and I'm going to survey everybody there. And the people that are in the other groups, like 2, 3, 4, and 6, they don't get asked any questions at all. So it's similar to stratified in that I'm starting with groups, but instead of grabbing a couple people from each group, I grab entire groups and survey them. The last type of sampling that we have is often the easiest one to identify. It's a systematic sample. Again, it starts off saying that we need to have every single person in the population identified and numbered off. And then what we're going to do is we're going to kind of randomly select a starting point. Here you can see I'm starting at person number 2. And I'm going to survey person number 2. And then I'm going to survey every, third person. It could be every 5th person. It could be every 10,000th person. It doesn't really matter. It's just I'm going to go over some number of people and I'm going to continue this all the way down the line. And so you'll see here the people that I'm surveying are just every 3rd person in this example. And that's what we call a systematic sample. Okay. So one of our goals within our class here is going to be able to identify which sampling technique we're using within different scenarios. And if we look down here at example number 2, we'll see that we have several different problems where we're going to be asked to identify the sampling technique. So let's take a look at each of these and see if we can try to apply what we had just learned to help answer these questions. So, part A. A researcher wants to study the performance of high school students across the state of Illinois. In order to fairly represent performance across the state, the researcher randomly selects 6 of the 24 congressional districts and looks at data from each and every school within those districts. Okay, so you can kind of see here I have a little map of Illinois laid out with the different districts. And so we know here that the researcher is selecting 6 of those 24 groups and then surveying each and every school from those districts. Any idea which of the techniques that we described above this seems to match up with? Well, I think it sounds very much like a cluster sample, right? I made a bunch of groups, and then we selected a few of them and surveyed all of the individuals from them. So this here would indeed be a cluster sample. Remember, it would have been a stratified sample if we had surveyed a couple, say, schools from each one of the districts. That's the major difference there. Oh, let's try part B. A company sends out an email survey or email surveys for every 20th customer to fill out to better understand customers' opinions on the quality of the services that they received. This is where, again, gosh, identifying this is often very easy. If I'm sending something out to every 20th customer, that's automatically got to be that systematic sampling technique. Right? It's very much like what we saw here, where I'm going every third. And the last one, medical researchers want to study the effect of some TPA usage for patients who had strokes among hospitals in Michigan. Okay, the hospitals were first categorized by the number of patients that had been admitted with a stroke, and then an equal number of hospitals were selected from each of these groups. Okay, so I got a lot of hospitals. I first separate them out by number of patients that had strokes. So maybe there's like a low category, not a lot of strokes, a middle category, a lot of strokes, maybe a high category, maybe a very high category. And then I select an equal number of hospitals from each one of those groups. The goal was to ensure that the sampling adequately reflected the nature of current practice. Okay, well, I can see here again that I'm first categorizing things and creating groups, and then I'm picking an equal number from each of those groups. So this has got to end up being a stratified sample. So there it is. Hopefully this gives you kind of an idea of how these sorts of sampling techniques work and how I can actually identify them. Typically the ones that require the most practice is distinguishing cluster from stratified, and so don't be surprised if those are the ones that feel the most similar or confusing to you. With some practice you'll definitely be able to straighten that out.